They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody warned me that sometimes blood can drown you. My name is Isabella Morrison, but everyone just calls me Bella, when they bother to call me anything at all. I'm 32 years old and I've spent my entire life being invisible in my own family. But today, at my brother's wedding, everything changed. Today, they discovered that the daughter they threw away had been hiding the biggest secret of their lives. It started when I was 8 years old. Mom was lying in that hospital bed, her once beautiful auburn hair gone from the chemotherapy, her hands so thin they looked like paper. She squeezed my small fingers with what little strength she had left and whispered, "Bella, baby, you need to take care of Marcus for me, okay? He's only 5. He's going to need his big sister." I nodded solemnly, not understanding that those words would become the prison bars of my entire existence. When Mom died 3 days later, Dad fell apart completely. Robert Morrison had been a functioning alcoholic before. After the funeral, he became a barely functioning human being. He'd disappear for days, leaving me to feed Marcus cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because that's all I knew how to make. By the time I was 12, I was doing Marcus's laundry, helping with his homework, and walking him to school every morning. Dad would stumble in at random hours, sometimes with a job, sometimes without, but always with the same message. "Marcus is special, Bella. That boy's going to make something of himself. You just help him get there." The pattern became my normal. When Marcus needed school supplies, I'd skip lunch for weeks to save my allowance. When he wanted to join Little League, I babysat every weekend to pay for his equipment. When he got invited to birthday parties, I'd walk to the store and carefully count out coins to buy presents, never mentioning that I'd never been invited to a single party myself. Bella doesn't need much," Dad would tell relatives who occasionally asked about me. "She's a simple girl, but Marcus, now he's got potential." I believed him. I believed that my role was to be the foundation that held Marcus up, even if it meant disappearing myself. In high school, while Marcus was student body president and captain of the debate team, I was working shifts at the local diner after school, my tips going straight into the Marcus's college fund that Dad had set up in an old coffee can. When Marcus got accepted to Yale Law School, Dad cried actual tears of joy. It was the first time I'd seen him emotional about anything since Mom's death. "My boy's going to be somebody," he kept saying, calling everyone he knew. "A Morrison at Yale! Can you believe it?" The tuition was $60,000 a year. Dad looked at the acceptance letter like it was written in hieroglyphics. That's when I made the decision that would define the next decade of my life. I dropped out of community college where I'd been studying business at night, picked up 2 more jobs, and sold the small inheritance Mom had left me, a pearl necklace that had been her grandmother's. "Bella, you don't have to," Marcus started to say when I handed Dad the check. "Yes, I do," I cut him off. "This is your shot, Marcus. Don't waste it." For 4 years, I worked 60-hour weeks, 3 jobs, morning shift at the diner, afternoon cleaning offices, and night stocking at the grocery store. I lived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. I wore the same 3 outfits until they had holes, then patched them and kept wearing them. Every penny I earned went to Marcus's education, his living expenses, his spring break trips to Cabo that he said were networking opportunities. Dad never asked how I was managing. He never wondered why I looked thinner every time they bothered to see me. When Marcus would come home for holidays with stories about his classmates, the children of senators and CEOs, Dad would beam with pride and tell him he belonged in that world. "You're going to marry well, son," Dad would say. "A Yale man attracts a certain type of woman, quality women." I'd serve them dinner and clean their plates, invisible as always. Sometimes Marcus would catch my eye and give me a small smile that I interpreted as gratitude. I held on to those moments like lifelines. The day Marcus graduated from Yale Law, I wasn't invited to the ceremony. "It's very exclusive, Bella," Dad explained. "Limited tickets. You understand?" I watched it online instead, crying when Marcus walked across that stage, wearing the graduation gown I'd paid for with years of my life. After graduation, Marcus got a job at a prestigious firm in Manhattan. He moved into a high-rise apartment, started wearing $1,000 suits, and began dating Priscilla Berg. whose family owned half of Connecticut and had more money than some small countries. Suddenly, Marcus's visits home became less frequent, and when he did come, he seemed embarrassed by our small house, by Dad's beer belly and slurred speech, and especially by me. "Bella, maybe you could, I don't know, do something with yourself," he suggested one Thanksgiving, looking at my discount store sweater with disgust. "I'm trying to build a reputation here. Image matters in my world." "Your world?" I asked quietly. "The professional world. The real world. You wouldn't understand." That stung more than I expected. The real world? I'd been living in the real world since I was 8 years old, working and sacrificing while he lived in the bubble I'd created for him. But I just nodded and went back to the kitchen to finish cooking the dinner they'd both forget to thank me for. When Marcus announced his engagement to Priscilla, Dad was over the moon. "Berg. Do you know what that name means, Bella? Old money. Real society. Our Marcus is marrying into American royalty." I smiled and congratulated them, even though Marcus hadn't bothered to introduce me to Priscilla properly. She'd looked right through me like I was part of the furniture, which I supposed I was. The wedding planning consumed Dad's attention completely. He talked about nothing else for months, bragging to anyone who'd listen about his son marrying into the Berg family. He bought a new suit he couldn't afford, got his teeth fixed, and even quit drinking for 3 weeks to look presentable for the society event of the year. Nobody mentioned what I might wear. Nobody asked if I needed anything for the wedding. It was assumed that I'd figure it out myself, like I always did. When I asked Dad about +1s, he looked confused. "+1? For what?" "For the wedding. Can I bring a date?" He laughed. "Bella, honey, this isn't that kind of wedding. This is formal. High society. You just try to blend in, okay? Don't draw attention to yourself." The message was clear. I was invited out of obligation, not because I was wanted there. I was to be the poor relation, quiet and grateful just to be included. The same role I'd played my entire life. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus called with an unexpected request. "Bella, I need you to wear black to the wedding." "Black? To a wedding? It's what the service staff is wearing. Priscilla's family has very specific ideas about presentation. It would just be easier if you blended in with them." The realization hit me like a physical blow. They wanted me to dress like the help because that's how they saw me. After everything I'd sacrificed, every dollar I'd earned to put him through school, every dream I'd given up so he could chase his, I was being asked to cosplay as a servant at his wedding. "Marcus," I said quietly, "I'm your sister. I know that, and I appreciate everything you've done. But this is important, Bella. Priscilla's father is considering me for partner track. Her family needs to see that I fit into their world. Having family members who don't quite fit the image could hurt my chances. Family members, not my sister. Family members. Like I was a distant cousin who'd wandered in from the wrong side of the tracks. I hung up without agreeing, but when the wedding day arrived, I wore the black dress. I told myself it was because I didn't want to cause problems for Marcus on his big day. Looking back, I think it was because some part of me still believed I deserved to be invisible. The Berg estate was something out of a movie. Rolling lawns, marble statues, and gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's yearly salaries. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, and vehicles I couldn't even identify but knew cost more than houses. I felt completely out of place in my simple black dress from Target, holding a small gift bag that contained the only thing I could afford, a modest picture frame from the drugstore. Around me, wedding guests in designer clothing air-kissed and discussed their summers in the Hamptons, their children at private schools, their charity galas. The seating arrangement was my first real clue about where I stood in this family hierarchy. While Dad had been seated with distant Berg relatives in the middle section, I was directed to the very back corner, at a small table with the wedding photographer's assistant and 2 catering staff members who were taking a break. "Oh, are you with the venue?" asked the photographer's assistant, a kind-faced woman named Sarah. Before I could answer, one of the catering staff leaned over. "She's got to be family. She looks just like the groom." "Sister, maybe?" "Half-sister. I found myself saying, though I'd never used that term before in my life. It felt safer somehow, like it explained why I was sitting with the workers instead of with the family. From my corner table, I watched Marcus and Priscilla exchange vows under an arch of white roses that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Dad was crying again, proud tears for his successful son. The Berg family looked exactly like what they were: American aristocracy, confident in their place at the top of the social ladder. Marcus looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. For a moment, watching him smile at his beautiful bride, I felt a warm surge of pride. I had helped make this possible. My sacrifices had led to this moment. Maybe that was enough. The reception was held in the estate's ballroom, a space so grand it could have housed entire families. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables decorated with arrangements that were individually worth more than my monthly rent. I remained at my back corner table watching the celebration from a distance like a spectator at someone else's life. During dinner, I worked up the courage to approach Marcus. He was holding court at the head table with Priscilla and her parents, telling some story that had everyone laughing. I waited for a pause in the conversation, then stepped forward. "Marcus," I said softly, "could I talk to you for just a minute?" He looked up, and for a split second I saw annoyance flash across his face before he caught himself. "Oh, Bella, hi." He glanced nervously at the Vanderbergs, who were staring at me with barely concealed confusion. "I just wanted to say congratulations," I continued. "And maybe, remember when we were kids and you used to build those elaborate Lego cities? You'd spend hours on them and I'd—" "Bella." Marcus stood up abruptly, his voice sharp. "Not now. This isn't the time for childhood stories." Priscilla's mother, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice and disappointment, leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. They both looked at me and then at Marcus with expressions that clearly said, "Handle this." "I just thought—" I started again. "Don't," Marcus cut me off, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Just don't, okay? You're embarrassing yourself, and me. These people don't need to hear about before. About when we were poor. I'm trying to build something here, Bella. Don't ruin it for me." The words hit me like slaps. Before. When we were poor. As if our entire childhood, all the memories I'd treasured, all the sacrifices I'd made, were something shameful to be hidden away. I stepped back, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. Around us, conversation had stopped. The Vanderbergs were watching this interaction like they were studying a fascinating but distasteful insect. Other guests at nearby tables had turned to look, sensing drama. That's when Dad appeared, and I knew from his flushed face and the slight sway in his step that his 3-week sobriety had ended sometime before the ceremony. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice too loud for the elegant space. "Nothing, Dad," Marcus said quickly. Bella was just what?" Dad's eyes focused on me with the kind of anger I hadn't seen since I was a child. "What did you do now?" "I didn't do anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to congratulate Marcus and make a scene," Dad finished. "Jesus Christ, Bella. This is the most important day of your brother's life, and you're up here bothering him with your nonsense." The ballroom had gone quiet around us. 100 guests in $1,000 outfits were watching the poor family's drama unfold like dinner theater. I could feel their eyes on me, see the mixture of pity and disgust on their faces. "Dad, please," I said. "I wasn't making a scene. You just what?" His voice was getting louder, more aggressive. Years of resentment seemed to be boiling over. "You just had to insert yourself where you don't belong? Look around, Bella. Look at this place. Look at these people. This is where Marcus belongs now. This is his world. And you're just—" He stopped, seeming to search for the cruelest words possible. "You're just a reminder of everything he's trying to escape." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I was drowning in it, suffocating under the weight of 100 stares. Marcus looked mortified. But not for me. For himself, for the scene playing out in front of his new in-laws. "Robert," came a cold voice from behind me. Priscilla's father, William Vanderberg, had stood up from the head table. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued outside. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, delivered with the kind of authority that comes from generations of wealth and social control. Dad, drunk as he was, recognized it immediately and seemed to deflate. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right. This is—" He looked at me with disgust. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." And then he said the words that would echo in my mind for the rest of my life. "You were a mistake, Bella. The biggest mistake I ever made." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. One moment I was standing there, reeling from his words, and the next my cheek was on fire and I was stumbling backward. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. But what I remember most clearly was the laughter, soft, quickly stifled, but unmistakably there. Some of these people, these society elites, were actually amused by the poor girl getting put in her place. I touched my cheek, feeling the heat radiating from the handprint Dad had left there. Marcus was frozen at the head table, his mouth slightly open in shock. Priscilla looked horrified, but not at what had been done to me, at what had been done in front of her family. "That's enough," I whispered, though I wasn't sure anyone could hear me over the ringing in my ears. "You're damn right that's enough," Dad snarled. 32 years old and still acting like a child, still expecting the world to revolve around you. Well, guess what, Bella? It doesn't. It never has. You've been nothing but a burden since the day you were born, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. The words kept coming, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. He talked about how I'd never amounted to anything, how I was an embarrassment to the family name, how Marcus had succeeded despite me, not because of anything I'd done. The crowd watched it all, some looking uncomfortable, but none intervening. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper, the part of me that had always believed I deserved this treatment, that had accepted being invisible and unappreciated because that was just my role in the family. That part finally shattered completely, and in the space where it had been, something else began to grow. Something cold and fierce and absolutely done with being treated like garbage by people who owed their success to my sacrifices. I was about to say something, what, I'll never know, when the ballroom doors opened. The first thing I noticed was how everyone's attention shifted away from me instantly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Even Dad, in the middle of his tirade, trailed off and turned to look. A man walked in, tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair and the kind of presence that didn't just enter a room, but commanded it. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than Dad's car, and he moved with the confident stride of someone who owned whatever space he occupied. But it was the reaction of the Vanderberg family that told me this wasn't just any late arrival. William Vanderberg, the man who had just ordered my father around like a servant, practically shot out of his chair. Priscilla's mother, the ice queen who had been whispering about me moments before, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh my God," I heard someone whisper. "That's Alexander Sterling." The name hit the crowd like an electric shock. Conversations erupted in hushed, urgent tones. I heard fragments. "Sterling Enterprises. Billionaire. I thought he never came to social events." Alexander Sterling. Even I knew that name. His face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine just last month. Tech genius turned business mogul, one of the youngest billionaires in America. The kind of man who made other rich people feel poor. He scanned the room until his eyes found mine, and then, I'll never forget this as long as I live, he smiled. Not the polite social smile you give to strangers, but the warm, genuine smile you give to someone you love. He walked straight toward me, ignoring the Vanderbergs, who were clearly trying to get his attention. Stepping around Dad, who was still frozen in shock, moving through the crowd that parted for him like he was royalty. "Sorry I'm late, darling." he said when he reached me, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the people nearby. Traffic was murder. And then, before I could process what was happening, he leaned down and kissed me. Not a peck on the cheek or a polite greeting, a real kiss, soft and claiming, like he'd been doing it for years. When he pulled back, he kept one arm around my waist and turned to face the stunned crowd. I hope I haven't missed anything important. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Dad's mouth was hanging open. Marcus looked like he'd been hit by lightning. The Berg family appeared to be collectively having some kind of breakdown. "Alex," I started to say, but he squeezed my hand gently. "Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly, just for me. "I think it's time we told them the truth." "Mrs. Sterling." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. But as I looked up into Alexander Sterling's warm brown eyes, I saw something there that I'd never seen before in my entire life. I saw someone who thought I was worth protecting. The ballroom erupted into chaos. William Vanderberg was pushing through guests to reach us, his face pale with what looked like panic. Marcus had stumbled away from the head table, leaving Priscilla staring after him in confusion. Dad was swaying on his feet, his alcohol-clouded brain clearly struggling to process what was happening. But Alexander Sterling, Alex, just stood there calmly, his arm around me like a shield, waiting for the storm he'd just created to reach us. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. The chaos that erupted around us felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. William Vanderberg reached us first, his perfectly composed facade cracking as he extended a trembling hand toward Alex. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice pitched higher than the authoritative tone he'd used on my father minutes earlier. "What an unexpected pleasure. I had no idea you knew the Morrison family." Alex's arm tightened protectively around my waist. "I know Bella very well, actually. We're married." The words hit the crowd like a bomb going off. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone dropped what sounded like an entire tray of glasses in the distance. Priscilla's mother made a noise that was part gasp, part sob. "Married?" William's voice cracked completely. "But when? How?" "6 months ago," Alex said calmly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a folded document and handed it to William with the casual confidence of a man who never doubted he'd be obeyed. "Certificate's right there if you need proof." William's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned it quickly, then again more slowly, as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. This is real?" "Very real," Alex confirmed, though we kept it private. Bella wanted to focus on family, and I respected that. Speaking of which, his gaze shifted to my father, who was still standing frozen in shock, his hand still raised from where he'd slapped me. "I believe you were in the middle of something when I arrived." Dad's face had gone from red to white to a sickly green color. He opened his mouth several times, but no sound came out. Marcus appeared at his shoulder, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. "Bella," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. Are you really—" Before I could answer, Alex reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone. "William, I think you should see this too." He scrolled to what looked like a contract document. "Sterling Enterprises currently holds the exclusive manufacturing rights for Vanderberg Industries' new product line. 60% of your company's projected revenue for the next 3 years. William's face went completely white. "Yes, we're very grateful for that partnership." "And Marcus," Alex continued, his voice still perfectly pleasant while delivering what I was beginning to realize were calculated strikes. "You work for Hartwell and Associates, correct?" Yes, sir," Marcus stammered. "Subsidiary of Sterling Legal. Has been for 2 years now. I believe your employment contract includes a morality clause about representing the company's values with integrity and respect." Alex's smile never wavered, but there was steel underneath it. Interesting how these connections work out, isn't it? The implications were sinking in around the room like stones dropping into still water. The Vanderberg family's business was dependent on Alex. Marcus's career was in Alex's hands. And Dad. The Morrison family residence, Alex said, as if reading my thoughts. 1247 Elm Street. Sterling Holdings purchased the mortgage from Fairfield Bank 18 months ago. I review all our residential accounts personally. Dad made a sound like he was choking. You own our house? Sterling Holdings does, yes, along with about 60% of the residential mortgages in this county. I like to keep track of my investments. Alex's tone remained conversational, but the message was clear, especially when they involve family. The weight of what was happening began to settle on everyone present. These people who had spent the evening looking down on me, who had laughed when my father slapped me, who had treated me like something they'd scrape off their shoes. They were all connected to the man whose arm was around me, the man who was calling me his wife. Priscilla appeared at Marcus's side, her face pale and confused. Marcus, what's happening? Who is this woman to you? She's my sister, Marcus said quietly, the words sounding like they were being pulled from him with pliers. Your sister? Priscilla's voice rose an octave. The one you said was the one you told me. She stopped, clearly realizing that whatever Marcus had told her about me wasn't something she wanted to repeat in front of Alex. What did he tell you? Alex asked pleasantly, though I could feel the tension in his body. Priscilla looked trapped. He said that family issues meant she couldn't be very involved in the wedding. Family issues, Alex repeated. Interesting way to put it. He looked at Marcus with the kind of expression I'd seen him wear in business magazine interviews, politely interested, but absolutely ruthless. And what exactly did you mean by that, Marcus? Marcus was sweating now, actual beads of perspiration forming on his forehead. There was a misunderstanding. I never meant to imply, because from where I was standing, Alex continued, it looked like you were ashamed of your sister, the sister who worked 3 jobs to pay for your Yale education, the sister who sold her inheritance to cover your living expenses, the sister who sacrificed her own education so you could have yours. The ballroom had gone dead silent. Every word Alex spoke carried the weight of absolute authority, and every revelation hit like a physical blow. I could see the calculation happening in real time on faces around the room, the reassessment of who I was, what I meant, what insulting me might cost them. How do you know all that? Dad asked hoarsely. Alex turned to him with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Because Bella told me. Every sacrifice she made for this family, every dollar she earned that went to Marcus's education, every time she went without so he could have more. His voice hardened. Every time you made her feel like she wasn't enough. Now wait just a minute, Dad started, some of his belligerence returning. You don't know what it was like raising 2 kids alone after their mother died. I did the best I could. Did you? Alex's voice was deadly quiet. Because from what I understand, Bella was the one raising Marcus. Bella was the one working multiple jobs. Bella was the one making sure he had everything he needed while you were drinking yourself into oblivion every night. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Dad's face flushed red again, but this time with embarrassment rather than anger. Several guests had pulled out their phones and were clearly recording or live tweeting what was happening. The Vanderberg family looked like they were watching their social standing crumble in real time. You have no right, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. I have every right, Alex replied. She's my wife, which makes her my responsibility to protect, something you clearly never understood. That's when William Vanderberg stepped forward again, desperation clear in his voice. Mr. Sterling, perhaps we could discuss this privately? I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, there's been a misunderstanding, all right, Alex said, but not on my part. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out another document. This is the contract renewal for your manufacturing deal. It comes up for review next month. William's hand shook as he took the paper. Mr. Sterling, please. Surely we can work something out. This is a family matter. It has nothing to do with business. Everything has to do with business when it involves my family, Alex said coldly. And the way your family treated my wife tonight tells me everything I need to know about your character. Priscilla's mother finally found her voice. We had no idea she was connected to you. If we had known, you would have treated her with basic human decency? Alex finished. How enlightened of you. The sarcasm in his voice was cutting. Around us, I could see other wedding guests slowly backing away, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the social disaster unfolding at the head table. Marcus stepped forward, his face desperate. Mr. Sterling, Alex, sir, please. I love my sister. I've always loved her. Tonight got out of hand, but that doesn't represent how I really feel. Doesn't it? Alex asked. Because from what I witnessed, you told her she was embarrassing you. You asked her to dress like the help. You've spent years accepting her sacrifices while treating her like she was somehow beneath you. His voice dropped to a whisper. Tell me, Marcus, when was the last time you said thank you? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched on until it became its own answer. That's what I thought, Alex said. But I could see the question in everyone's eyes, the same question that was burning in my own mind. How was this possible? How had I, invisible Bella Morrison, ended up married to one of the most powerful men in America? Alex seemed to sense the unspoken questions. I think, he said, that it's time for the full story. 6 months earlier, I'd been living the same invisible life I'd always lived, working 3 jobs, sending money to help Marcus with his lawyer lifestyle, living in a studio apartment that was barely larger than a closet. One of those jobs was with a cleaning service that had contracts with several high-end office buildings in downtown. Sterling Enterprises occupied the top 15 floors of the Meridian Tower, and I was part of the crew that cleaned their offices after hours. It was good work. They paid better than most cleaning companies, and the offices were usually empty by the time we arrived at 9 p.m. I'd been working there for about 2 months when I first saw him. I was in the executive break room, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces, when I heard someone in the adjacent office. It was almost midnight, way past when anyone should have been there. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked around to the corner. A man in an expensive suit was sitting at a massive desk, surrounded by papers and multiple computer monitors. He looked exhausted, running his hands through his hair as he stared at spreadsheets. I should have just finished my work and left. That would have been the professional thing to do. But something about the way he was sitting there, alone in that huge office at midnight, reminded me of myself. Isolated, working while everyone else was living their lives. Without really thinking about it, I knocked softly on the doorframe. He looked up, startled. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was still here. Just finishing up the break room, I said. I can come back later if you need privacy. No, it's fine. He rubbed his eyes. I should probably head home anyway. My assistant keeps telling me I work too much. I smiled. Assistants usually know what they're talking about. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his whole face. I'm Alex, by the way. Bella. Well, Bella, thank you for not reporting me to building security for being here after hours. Your secret's safe with me. That should have been the end of it, a polite exchange between strangers who happened to cross paths. But when I came back the following week, he was there again. And the week after that, it became a routine. I'd finish the break room, he'd look up from his work, and we'd exchange a few words. Nothing deep or personal, just small talk about weather, or how late we were both working, or the terrible coffee in the building's vending machines. But gradually, those conversations got longer. I learned that he often worked late because he couldn't sleep, that he'd built his company from nothing and still felt the need to personally oversee everything. He learned that I was working multiple jobs, that I was helping support family, that I'd given up my own education for other priorities. That's admirable, he said one night when I mentioned sending money to help with Marcus's expenses. Family should come first. Do you have family? I asked. His expression darkened slightly. Not really. My parents died when I was young. Never had siblings. I've built the company, but sometimes I wonder if that's enough. There was something so lonely in the way he said it that I found myself looking forward to those midnight conversations more than I should have. Here was this incredibly successful man who seemed to have everything, and yet he was working alone in an empty office every night, just like I was cleaning alone in empty buildings. One night, about 3 months into our acquaintance, I found him looking particularly frustrated. Papers were scattered across his desk, and he was staring at his computer screen like it had personally offended him. "Rough night?" I asked. "Rough month," he said. "We're trying to close a deal, but the other company keeps moving the goalposts. I'm starting to think they're negotiating in bad faith." I knew I should just nod sympathetically and move on. I was a cleaning lady. He was a CEO. What could I possibly offer? But something about his frustration reminded me of a situation I'd encountered at one of my other jobs. Have you considered that they might be stalling because they're waiting for their fiscal year to end? Sometimes companies will drag out negotiations if closing the deal in the current quarter would affect their taxes or reporting. He looked up at me with surprise. That's actually a really good point. I hadn't considered the timing from their perspective. He studied me with new interest. "Have you done business negotiation before?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "Not formally. I was studying business before I had to drop out, and I've picked up things from various jobs." "What kind of business degree?" "I never finished. Had to leave school to help with family finances." Something shifted in his expression. "Would you be interested in finishing?" The conversation that followed changed everything. Alex, who I learned was Alexander Sterling, though he'd never mentioned his last name before, offered to pay for me to complete my degree. Not as charity, but because he was genuinely interested in my perspective on business problems. "You see things differently," he explained. "Most of the people I work with come from the same background, went to the same schools, think in the same patterns. You've had to solve problems from the ground up. That's valuable." I should have said no. Should have maintained the boundaries between us. But the offer was too tempting, and Alex was too persuasive. Before I knew it, I was enrolled in night classes, working fewer hours at the cleaning company, and spending more time talking with Alex about business strategies and market analysis. Somewhere in those months of late-night conversations and shared ideas, friendship turned into something deeper. Alex would bring dinner to share during my breaks. I started looking forward to his smile when I walked into his office. We talked about everything: his loneliness at the top of the business world, my frustration with always putting everyone else's needs first, our shared love of old movies and terrible puns. The night he kissed me, we'd been working on a presentation together for 3 hours. I'd been helping him analyze consumer data for a new product launch, and we'd finally cracked the pattern we'd been looking for. "You're brilliant," he said, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Do you know that?" Before I could answer, he was kissing me. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper when I kissed him back. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "I know this is complicated," he said. "The difference in our positions, our backgrounds." "Alex," I interrupted. "I don't care about any of that." "Neither do I," he said. "But other people will." He was right, of course. When we started dating officially, the reaction from his business associates ranged from confusion to outright hostility. I was nobody from nowhere, a college dropout who cleaned offices for a living. What could someone like me possibly offer someone like him? But Alex didn't care. He introduced me to his world gradually, patiently, teaching me the social codes and business protocols I'd never learned. He celebrated every small victory in my classes like it was a major achievement. He made me feel like I was worth something for the first time in my life. The proposal came 4 months after our first kiss. We were in his office again, our place, where everything had started, when he got down on one knee with a ring that probably cost more than I'd made in my entire life. "Bella Morrison," he said, "you've made me remember what it feels like to have a family. Will you marry me?" Through my tears, I said yes. We married quietly at the courthouse the following week, with just 2 witnesses Alex had hired for the occasion. I wanted to tell my family, but Alex convinced me to wait. "Let's have some time for just us," he said. Once the world knows, everything will change. Can we have this secret for a little while?" I agreed, partly because I wanted to protect what we had, and partly because I wasn't sure how to explain to my family that I'd somehow married a billionaire. The whole thing felt like a fairy tale that might disappear if I examined it too closely. For 6 months, I lived a double life. During the day, I was Bella Sterling, wife to one of the most powerful men in America, living in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. At night and on weekends, I was still just Bella Morrison, checking in on Dad, sending money to help Marcus, pretending my life hadn't completely transformed. Alex understood my need to keep supporting my family, even when I told him the whole truth about how they treated me. "They're the only family you have," he said. "I get why that matters to you." But as Marcus's wedding approached, I could see the strain it was putting on Alex to watch me diminish myself for people who didn't appreciate me. The night before the wedding, he made one last attempt to convince me not to go. "You don't owe them this, Bella," he said as I laid out my black dress, the dress Marcus had asked me to wear so I'd blend in with the service staff. "You've given them enough." "It's just one night," I told him. "One last thing, and then maybe things can be different." He'd kissed my forehead and held me close. "If you change your mind, if you need me for any reason, call me. I'll come." I'd promised I would, never imagining I'd actually need rescuing. But when Dad slapped me in front of all those people, when Marcus stood there and let it happen, when the Berg family laughed at my humiliation, I knew Alex was right. I'd given them enough. That's when I'd sent the text that brought him racing across the city to that ballroom. "I need you." Now, standing in the ruins of Marcus's wedding reception, I watched the dominoes continue to fall. William Berg was frantically making phone calls trying to do damage control for his business relationship. Priscilla was crying, though whether from embarrassment or fear for her new husband's career, I couldn't tell. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick, and Dad was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Bella," he said hoarsely, "I didn't know. I never knew you were married to someone who actually values her," Alex finished coldly. "Someone who recognizes her worth?" Yes, that must come as quite a shock. The consequences of the evening were already spreading beyond the ballroom. I could see guests on their phones, no doubt sharing the story with friends and contacts. By tomorrow, the entire social circle would know that the Morrison family had publicly humiliated a Sterling. The business implications alone would be staggering. William Berg approached us one more time, his face gray with desperation. "Mr. Sterling, please, I'm begging you to reconsider. Our families have no quarrel with each other. This was a misunderstanding." "Was it?" Alex asked. "Because from where I stood, it looked like your family encouraged the abuse of my wife. It looked like you found it entertaining." "We had no idea who she was." "And that makes it better?" Alex's voice cut like a blade. "That you only treat people with respect if they're connected to wealth and power. That basic human decency is contingent on social status?" William had no answer for that. None of them did. "The contracts are under review," Alex said finally. "All of them. Sterling Enterprises will be evaluating our relationships with any individual or company that was present here tonight. We'll be making decisions based on character and values alignment." It was a corporate death sentence delivered with perfect politeness. Within hours, the Berg family would be scrambling to save their business. Marcus would be wondering if he still had a job. Dad would be staring at foreclosure notices. But Alex wasn't done. "There is one way this situation might be resolved," he said thoughtfully. Hope flickered in William's eyes. "Anything. Name it." "My wife deserves an apology, a real one. Public and sincere." Alex's gaze moved from William to Priscilla to Marcus to Dad. From everyone who participated in tonight's humiliation. The silence stretched out painfully. I could see the calculation happening, the weighing of pride against financial survival. One by one, they began to step forward. William went first, his voice shaking. "Mrs. Sterling, I sincerely apologize for my family's behavior tonight. We were inexcusably rude, and you deserved far better treatment in our home." Priscilla followed, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Bella. I should never have let Marcus ask you to dress like staff. I should have stood up for you. Marcus was next, and when he spoke, his voice broke. Bella, I've been a terrible brother. You sacrificed everything for me, and I repaid you by being ashamed of you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Finally, all eyes turned to Dad. He stood there swaying slightly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Pride warred with desperation, love with resentment, the alcohol in his system with the reality of what he stood to lose. I'm sorry, Bella, he said finally, the words coming out like they were being dragged from him. I was drunk, and I was wrong to hit you. You didn't deserve that. It wasn't enough. We all knew it wasn't enough. But it was a start. Alex looked at me questioningly, and I realized the decision was mine. I could accept these half-hearted apologies and try to rebuild relationships with people who had shown me their true character. Or I could walk away from the family that had never valued me and embrace the new life waiting for me. The choice was easier than I'd expected. Thank you for the apologies, I said quietly, but I think it's time for me to go. I turned to Alex, who was watching me with pride and love shining in his eyes. Take me home? Always, he said, offering me his arm. As we walked toward the ballroom doors, I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind us, I could hear the chaos beginning, frantic conversations about damage control, desperate phone calls to lawyers and business contacts, the sound of a family realizing they'd just destroyed their own lives. But ahead of us was freedom, a life where I was valued and protected and loved, a life where I was enough, exactly as I was. The last thing I heard as we left was Marcus calling my name, his voice thick with tears and regret. I didn't turn around. I'd spent 32 years looking back, trying to fix things that were never my responsibility to fix. It was time to look forward instead. 6 months later, Alex and I were having breakfast in our penthouse when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. He'd been calling weekly since the wedding, trying to rebuild our relationship. Usually, I let it go to voicemail. This time, I answered. Bella? His voice was different, humbler, more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. Thank you for picking up. What's going on, Marcus? I wanted to update you on everything. The fallout from the wedding. He paused. And to ask for your forgiveness. Really ask, not just apologize because I have to. Over the following conversation, I learned the full scope of what had happened after Alex and I left that night. The Berg family's business had collapsed within 3 weeks. Sterling Enterprises had terminated their contract, and the social stigma from the wedding had caused other partners to distance themselves as well. Priscilla and Marcus's marriage had ended in an ugly divorce when it became clear that Marcus could no longer provide the lifestyle she expected. Marcus had lost his job, his wife, and his social standing. Dad had lost the house and was living in a small apartment, working part-time at a hardware store and attending AA meetings. I know you have no reason to forgive me, Marcus said. I know I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. What you gave up for me, what you sacrificed. I understand, and I'm grateful, and I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see it. I looked across the breakfast table at Alex, who was reading his tablet but listening to every word. He caught my eye and nodded slightly. The decision was mine to make. Marcus, I said finally, I forgive you, but things can't go back to the way they were. I know, he said quickly. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance to be a real brother to you, to earn back your trust. It would take time, I knew. Years of rebuilding, of proving that the changes were real and lasting. But for the first time since the wedding, I felt something other than anger when I thought about my family. I felt hope. Alex reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing gently. In his eyes, I saw the same thing I'd been seeing for months. Love, pride, and the absolute certainty that I was worth fighting for. We'll see, I told Marcus. We'll see. After I hung up, Alex leaned back in his chair and smiled. How do you feel? Free, I said without hesitation. For the first time in my life, completely free. He raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. To freedom, then, and a family that actually deserves you. I clinked my cup against his, looking out at the city spread below us. Somewhere out there, Marcus was learning what it meant to rebuild a life from scratch. Dad was learning to live with the consequences of his choices. The Berg family was learning that money and social status meant nothing without character and basic human decency. And I was learning what it felt like to be truly valued, to have someone who would cross any room and face any challenge to protect me. It had taken 32 years, but I'd finally found my happy ending. Not the fairy tale kind where everyone learns their lesson and families reunite in perfect harmony, but the real kind, where you learn your own worth and refuse to accept anything less than what you deserve. The girl who had spent her whole life being invisible had finally stepped into the light, and she was never going back into the shadows again.